Can you real quick show them the donkey before we get started? Guys, thanks for putting up with me today. I couldn't be here for class, so I'm pre-recording a lecture with Colleen. We are in my office at Hope Plumbing. So if like random strangers stop in, it's okay, they'll be gone quickly. Today's topic, we are talking about something we've talked about a little bit before, which is moral relativism, this idea of whether morality, Colleen is making the worst faces at me now. I know how you guys feel. I'm sorry, it's just my job. I find it interesting. There's nothing we can do about it. So moral relativism, where the question is ultimately, is morality objective? That is, are there certain moral truths that just exist, period? Or is morality more dependent on culture, time, place, the way you were raised, the society you grew up in? So it's one of the central debates in ethics, is whether or not there are moral standards that sort of apply across all time and geography and locations or societies, or does it really depend on the society that you grew up in? So the article that we read for today is actually from an anthropologist named Ruth Benedict. It's the case for moral relativism. So she is going to argue, as I'm sure you guys all did all the readings, she is going to argue that morality is relative. That is to say, morality is not some set of fundamental truths. It's changing. What makes something right or wrong is totally dependent upon the culture or society that you grow up in. I'm, of course, just as a reminder, not arguing that I am of this position. We will hear from a different philosopher later this week, Mary Midgley, who's going to make the opposite argument, so you guys can kind of see both sides of the perspective. But for today, we're going to talk about Benedict and why she thinks morality is relative. So the place where she starts her article is by talking about sort of the vast array of different societies and cultures that exist. Specifically, she's having a conversation about societies and places where they're still very much a simple people, right? These are tribal places, these are non-developed societies, these are not big cities. And she thinks that these types of societies provide a great case study, if you will, for thinking about these types of questions. So what she says about our civilization, like we'll just call it the Western world, right? The United States, Europe, where morality seems to be, or to have quite a bit in common, right? There's a lot of similar themes. Like, for example, most everyone in Europe and the United States agree that women should have the right to vote, and the laws sort of support that belief or that position. What Benedict is suggesting is that our current set of morality is just one of the many possibilities that we could have arrived at. So we very easily could have arrived at a modern day morality that looks nothing like the morality that we have in place, right? There are external factors that affect morality. There's been a variety of stuff happen in law, wars, individual characters that have influenced morality. And Benedict is just saying that while there is a big part of the world that generally agrees on some certain moral principles, it wasn't inevitable that we would arrive at these conclusions. We just happened to get here. In fact, many adjustments have been made to our moral system over time. I mean, everything from owning people to caste systems to women getting the right to vote, to black women not really getting the right to vote until like the mid-60s. We didn't pass ADA law until the early 90s. Gay people couldn't get married 25 years ago. So there's sort of, according to Benedict, always a shift happening in morality where we are sort of constantly changing what we think is morally right or morally wrong behavior. And cultures, honestly, are so variable across time and the planet that even the way people show joy or anger or fear are vastly different. Not everybody expresses those emotions in the same way. Concepts of what's sexually acceptable or sexuality varies greatly from culture to culture. It's varied greatly in the United States in the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, it's people, generally speaking, have much different opinions on these subjects than they did 50 or 100 years ago. What Benedict means to say is that some of the things that we think are abnormal are very normal in other places. So for example, if we witness somebody go into like a catatonic state or like a trance and say that, you know, God or a spirit had inhabited their body, we would probably find that to be pretty strange behavior. But the reality is this was a large part of Catholicism 400 or 500 years ago. It was commonplace that a religious experience entailed having some sort of trance or catatonic state, and when that was not thought of as peculiar, it was celebrated. So certainly there are places across the globe that still value this type of behavior. They are sometimes the people that have these experiences are even thought of as being like lucky or superior or divine or however you want to think about that. But her point in all of this is just to say that there is no sort of final standard for morality, that morality is ultimately what she's going to tell us is that morality is just socially acceptable behavior, and that's it. That's all that it means to talk about morality is really to talk about what is habitually accepted. So let's talk a little bit more about abnormalities. Abnormalities here as like cornerstones there. So behaviors that are thought to be odd or peculiar in our society, but are like cornerstones of other people's societies. For example, black magic in the northwest part of Melanesia is extremely common, so much so that they think the world is just perpetually sort of guided by this dark black magic. So one of the things that people will do is women will choose to marry their enemies so as to like safeguard themselves against this black magic, right? The idea is that the world is so full of black magic that if you can like make friends with your enemy, you're better able to protect yourself. And of course, if Colleen told me that she was going to leave her husband to marry their sworn enemy so as to protect her family, I would be very concerned for Colleen. So more examples from Melanesia. If you have a good crop of food, right, like you grow yams or whatever and it produces really well, they just assume there's been some sort of theft or some sort of crime committed, and that's how you were able to get a bountiful crop, right? It wasn't the rain or the hard work you did or whatever it was. It's just the whole world is sort of affected by this black, dark magic. And I think if any of us were to start telling our friends, parents, teachers that we thought our grades were a result of black magic, or that the Butler men's team is going to win or is going to lose their next basketball game because of the sort of black magic that the other team is putting out into the world right now, people would find that to be pretty strange. This group of people lives in a constant fear of being poisoned. So like when they hand one another a gift, I think the greeting is something like, "Thank you for this poison, hopefully I can return the favor one day, or something to that effect. They so much live in fear of being poisoned that women won't leave like a pot of food unattended. So like if they're cooking at a community stove, they simply like won't go to the bathroom or something because they're worried somebody's going to poison their food. And like, this is the community that they live in. This isn't like strangers and enemies. This is their everyday life. There is a group of people sort of in every society who are, sometimes make really bad choices, and the way that gets judged is very different from society to society. So for example, with the group that we're talking about, occasionally like losing your mind and being in a fit of rage and like chasing people with a knife, not really seen as a big deal. Like you just kind of run away from the person and hope they calm down. And then, you say they'll feel better tomorrow and they won't want to stab people or whatever. But then the person that is thought of to be really weird is the person who is like the nice, genuine, friendly, helpful person. Like the person that we think of in the US as like the ideal person is basically laughed at in this society. Like they just can't wrap their head around why anyone would behave like that. How could you possibly want to help people? Why are you not worried about some sort of fear of being poisoned? So all of this is just to say, again, that morality is something that is very fluid, that people are shaped by their own cultures, that morality is not some final objective truth. It is just a long, sort of ever-changing set of norms or behaviors that are acceptable. So I think it's helpful to think of morality as a relativist, as just being like habit. So which habits are socially acceptable? That is basically what that group means when they talk about morality. The point of these examples, of which there are several more in your book, and hopefully you've read through some of those. I mean, for example, the revenge killings, right? And it's not even that you go kill the person that killed your son, you just go kill anyone to avenge this person's death. So you might find yourself killing strangers to avenge the death of your son. This is just another one of the examples from the book of where people's behavior is very different. But the point of all these examples is, again, to say that normality is culturally defined. So normality, what's normal, what's acceptable is just defined by the culture. There is no final set of rules that sort of dictates what's absolutely right or wrong. And then abnormality is just the part of human behavior that isn't used. So normality in this sense is the part of human behavior that gets encouraged and used, and abnormality is the part of human behavior that gets discouraged and doesn't get used. So following from this sort of understanding of what constitutes normal, right, we're gonna talk about morality. And morality is basically just, for the relativist and for Ruth Benedict, morality is socially approved behavior, socially approved habits. It's not a question of, consequences. It's not a question of duty. There's not a rubric that you are going to apply to make moral decisions. It's just what makes something morally right is that it has been accepted in your society as right or as normal. So ultimately, what is normal or what is moral is just what is accepted, what is normally practiced, what is the expected behavior within your own society. So the way she closes this article is to say that people are shaped by their own societies, such that if one of you guys had been born in one of these other civilizations that we'd been talking about, that you would have the same set of ideals and principles and theories about right and wrong that that group does. What she says is that the overwhelming majority of people are simply just a product of their own environment, and they just believe in or they ascribe to the things that they learned from the time that they were little. So as some examples, had you grown up in a different time in the United States or a different part of the world, you might have a totally different understanding of homosexuality or women's rights or black magic or any of the things that we sort of think of as right or wrong or normal or immoral or whatever that looks like. If you grow up in a society where having a bunch of stuff is not something that's super valued, you probably wouldn't value it either. But because most of us have grown up in the United States, right? We live in a culture where possession gathering, wealth, making a good living, having a nice car, these are, for whatever reason, deemed to be important. So we value these things. The things that we don't like tend to exist in small numbers. So the types of behavior that we don't prefer here in the United States, we do our best to sort of thwart. We do our best to limit them, right? We put laws in place that limit behaviors, like it's illegal to poison someone in the United States because we don't want to poison people. So what Benedict is saying ultimately is that the things that we value will exist in large numbers, and the things that we don't value or that we dislike will exist in small numbers, because we will sort of modify people's behavior to match our preferences. And then finally, what Benedict says about sort of all of this about people is that mankind is very plastic. Mankind is very malleable. Mankind will basically take any form that is presented to them. So we can sort of imagine a scenario where people are growing up in all sorts of different times, places, ideas, and they will basically adapt themselves to whatever that norm is. And that is Benedict's case for why morality is relative. In our next class, we will talk about Mary Midgley in an article called Trying Out One's New Sword, where she will argue quite the opposite. She will say that there are certain things in morality that are just wrong, and we will talk about that. So finally, for today's class, I've posted, you guys have probably seen it by now, a set of questions that I want you to go through and answer about today's lecture, about today's reading, and just to generally put some thought into what you think about this question. Thanks for your patience. If you guys need anything from me, send me an email or text me or whatever, and I'll get you an answer as quickly as I can. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. See ya.